Hey everyone, and welcome to the April edition of 3030. I am your host, Pat Reinhart, and as always, thank you so much for spending 30 minutes of your valuable time with me. We have a lot to cover today because a lot has happened. As you can see, typically we usually do about four topics. We got six today. So number one, what we're going to go through, we are going to go through the April industry review. What I'm seeing and hearing there today. We will be covering the apparel / fashion industries, government sites, and also health tech, which was highly requested last month. Then we're going to talk about Google's March core update, which completed and didn't really have much bite. So nothing, not a super exciting update there. But again, after all the volatility that we had after the December update and all the garbage that happened in the middle, I'll take a boring update any day. Big thing that everyone is talking about right now is Google going to switch AI mode, switch to AI mode at Google AI, at Google I/O in May. I don't think so. I'm going to give you some reasons as to why I think that, but I actually just saw something which kind of lines up with how I think lines up with what I think they're actually going to do. But then we're going to talk about AIO visibility. We actually just released a new study yesterday, which really talks about how drastic it is from industry to industry. We're also going to talk about, I love Google. So Google Search Console has been reporting inflated impressions since May of 2025. That is just terrible. And then if we have time, I'm going to go and going to talk about, some fun that we have with Claude, and Conductor's MCP, which we will be releasing into the wild very, very soon. But let's get into it because we only have 30 minutes. Number one, April industry review. What am I seeing and hearing? Everyone, as you probably have noticed, there has not been that much movement, over the course of the last 30 days. Doomsday commenters are quiet. Volatility is way down for the first time in months, and sites seem pretty stable. That's really what we're seeing here right now. Again, the March core update, which we'll get into, has its own dedicated slide. We'll get into that in just a minute. Was pretty tame. We didn't see much movement there. Not much fluctuation. Kind of came and went without much fanfare. The March spam update also didn't really cause that much damage either. Again, was there fluctuation? Yes, there was fluctuation, but ultimately it didn't really cause that much damage. And then again, we saw fluctuation AI overviews. I have a whole section today dedicated to that, which we will talk about. But again, for the industries that I did see, we did see them all rise, over the course of the last 30 days. But right now, it is pretty quiet. It is pretty quiet out there. So something to be thankful for, I think, in these times of high volatility. So let's talk a little bit more about Google's March core update, right? Again, this took about, it took about 12 days to roll out, and it completed, again, for the most part, very, very little movement. Across all of our data, the sites that did move wasn't as violent. When the December update hit, it really exploded on, into the industry, right? It was very, it was very somewhat violent, when it dropped. And that's something to take into account here, is that this was not as big, as the December update, but ultimately, don't get me wrong, were there catastrophic graphs out there? Were there people that were moved? Were there sites that dipped heavily? Yes, there was. And what did they all have in common? Is that they were filled to the brim with AI slop content and just really, AI generated content that was clearly AI generated content. And, from there, with high confidence, they were the biggest losers. And I think that's really what the March update actually, really took care of or really went after. It just seemed to be a more an enhancement of all the volatility that we've seen over the course of the last, few months, which was really going after generic AI generated content. So that's something to take into account as well. But sites that don't do that, which hopefully is all of you, didn't see much movement. And honestly, everything that I looked at, it was a lot of positive movement, over the course of the last 30 days. But for the most part, pretty boring update. But again, I will take that all day long after all the volatility that we have seen over the course of the last few months. But let's get into it. So as everyone knows, we are audience requested here. So any industry that you want me to review, please put it in the chat now or anytime, through the program, and I will look through the transcription at the end of the show. And also, if you're watching this digitally on YouTube, which of course these are all posted to YouTube, or if you want to watch this again, you can also leave an industry that you'd like me to review in the comments there, and I will happily check that as well. So if you want me to review an industry, again, you can throw it in the chat now. And if you want me to, and if you want, you can all, if you're watching this digitally or on YouTube, you can also throw it into the comment section in YouTube. So with that, let's look at the apparel / fashion, industry. So think about like a lot of e-commerce sites, like a lot of e-commerce sites here. So Shein.com, a site that my wife orders things off of every single day. Everything seems to cost $3. But they not only have great deals, but they're also up 24% year over year. And they got another 3% bump at the March update. So from that standpoint, like a little bit of trouble in the June update, right? That happened. They were down for a little while, but then the December update was actually very kind to them. You can see that huge upswing. And again, like they have been, they're up and to the right. Good for Shein and for all of their cheap clothing that they sell. Young LA. So I was trying to kind of look around at sites that are of varying sizes. So Young LA is an up and coming brand. So I figured that would be interesting to look at because it's all, we have to remember it's not all huge enterprise sites out there. But they are up a whopping 48%. Again, their site is not huge, but that doesn't matter, right? Like the site is actually doing very well. The March update and really like the December update was kind to them. And then in February to March to April, they've seen a little bit of a drop off, but nothing really to write home about, only about 2%, through that core update. But ultimately, that's what we saw there. So again, another positive story. And Revolve.com, a larger site, a larger fashion apparel site, 12% increase in top 10 visibility over the course of the last 12 months. But not much change after the core update, right? Like this site has been good, steady growth over the core. They're an established site. They rank for quite a bit. 1% decrease, which is basically flat, through the update. But also when you're looking at AI overviews, again, like over the last few months, the March update, there was definitely, more rev up, for AI overviews here. And as you can see, all three of these sites from March to April all saw an increase, somewhat hockey stick. When you look at Revolve, they saw a pretty stark, increase, as well as Shein.com, right? Like definitely starting to see more happening there. But that's what's happening in apparel and fashion. Next, let's look in government. So government sites, not the sexiest of sites, right, Sam? Not the sexiest of sites. But ultimately, this actually has been requested quite a bit. I looked through the last year of 3030s since we started doing the audience requests. I think it's been about a year now. And this actually has been requested quite a few times. So I apologize to all the government folks out there that are interested in this. So kind of looked at a few different types of government sites. So number one, data.gov, right? 25% increase over the last year in top 10 visibility. Not really impacted at all by the March core update. Literally 0%, 0% across the board, completely flat. So that's something to take into account. And this was somewhat of a similar story, we saw around, but a bigger government site, USA.gov, right? So that's like the government's site, down 4% year over year. In top 10 visibility, another 2% since the March core update. Again, like this site is bigger, so like a 1 or 2% is a much bigger impact than if it only ranked for like 5 or 10,000 keywords. Ranking for almost 500,000 keywords. You're losing visibility there. So definitely on the way down, but nothing catastrophic. Of course, the year. But then SBA.gov, Small Business Association, so a 10% increase year over year in page one visibility, and was pretty flat through the March core update. So really, what we saw saw here was, for government sites, a little bit of a mixed bag. Mostly positive, right? Like the bigger sites like irs.gov, that one was hard to use because it has such an influx of activity in April, because it is yesterday was tax day, which is exciting, right? We all love doing our taxes, but so I decided to avoid that. But ultimately, pretty much mostly positive across the board. But the March core update really didn't do anything to these types of sites. We didn't really see any movement. Same story as the apparel brands, though, from an AI overview standpoint. All of the government sites that I looked across, pretty much across the board, saw increases, like this over the course of the last 60 days. So definitely the March update was, again, another kind of rev up for certain industries, for AI overview visibility. And again, everyone, we're just going to continue to see this going. We're just going to continue to see this going up and to the right as time goes on. And I see a question in the chat that I missed the first 10 minutes. What is the March core update? So the March core update, again, we all have to remember we have people of varying experience levels here, and knowledge levels. So a core update is a Google algorithm update that impacts, that creates volatility amongst visibility. So rankings, I typically look at the top 10 rankings because that's where most of the traffic is coming from, and that usually tells the most interesting stories. But ultimately in March, there was a core update, which means Google updated their core algorithm. And it really wasn't that much, right? Like we didn't see much movement in the data, mostly positive, honestly, across pretty much every industry I was looking at across our data was positive movement. Hopefully that answers your question. Now, moving on to the next one, health tech. This one was cool to look at. A lot of different types of companies here. Abbott.com, huge company, in this space, not necessarily a huge, online presence, but a big, like one of the leaders in the space, from what I gathered from my research, isn't having a great year at all. Bad news for the folks at Abbott, but 12% decrease in page one visibility, year over year, but basically remaining flat after the core update, right? So again, like down year over year, but again, it's like not the biggest site on earth, but like health tech sites like this aren't typically huge unless it's like Philips or something like that, like a huge company. But again, Abbott, as far as I know, is one of the leaders in the health tech space. Dexcom, another interesting site, which I think monitors has glucose like wearable glucose monitors, having a very good year, 23% increase year over year in top 10 visibility, another 2% with the March core update. The December update is when this site really started to see a bigger increase. So that's something to take into account as well. But again, doing really, really well here. And then Tempus, another health tech company, nice run with a 22% increase in page one visibility, survived the March core update. Can't believe it. Only seeing a 2% decrease, but up overall. And that's kind of what I saw across this industry, is that most sites were on a pretty good run. And as you can see here in December, that's where this site, Tempus and Dexcom really started to take off. And you can see at Abbott, the December update is where they started to have problems. And again, why that is would take deeper auditing. But for the most part, this is what this is kind of what I saw for most of this industry, which was a really good run, a nice bump up in December, and then pretty much nothing happening around the March core update, which is pretty much the story across every industry I looked at. But again, when you look at AI overviews, all up and to the right. So definitely the March update definitely had an impact on on AI overviews, as most core updates do. But again, I think we're just going to continue to see that number rise higher and higher and higher. So let's move on to the next topic. How are we doing on time? We're doing okay, halfway through. All right, I think I might make it to the Claude thing, which I might start doing every month, like just showing you weird stuff and cool stuff I'm doing in Claude with our MCP. MVP. Anyway, so let's talk about this. So this is a question I had a colleague call me the other day, and we were chatting about this. There is a lot of different, a lot of conversation happening in the, in the industry right now about it. Google I/O is in May. And every every IO, they take a step closer to an agentic future. Let's say at least the last 2 or 3 years. And there's a lot of people out there that think that they are going to announce that this is the year that they are going to move the default away from the traditional search experience and make it AI mode. Now, there are arguments or debates to be had either way. For me, I don't think that that's what's going to happen. I think that what they're going to announce is, I think we're going to get data in Search Console. I think that might happen because Bing released, citation data and AI data in their webmaster tools, and there are a lot of people that are using that right now. To inform decisions. I think we're going to get data in Search Console where they break out AI mode and AI overviews and performance. At least that's what I'm hoping. But that would make a lot of sense to me if they release that to kind of counteract Bing taking that up. Another thing, I do not think that they are just going to trash their paid business and all of a sudden just throw everyone into AI mode. And, because like impressions would go down considerably and they would lose money. I just don't see that happening. Now, will they give the option for AI mode to be your default? I'm sure is that something you can do now? I don't think so. But ultimately, maybe that's something that they'll do with AI mode. But I just don't see that that is what's going to happen. Now, what do I think is another possibility that's going to happen? I think that there also might be somewhat of a hybrid experience that might pop up here. Now, if anyone uses, Bing. If you use Bing, Copilot can follow you, right? Like you can have Copilot kind of take a ride with you around the internet. And I think that that's what we might also see as well, is that Google might actually, give you the opportunity, like let's say you click on a website. I wouldn't be surprised if the website would open up in a separate pane, and then you have side by side. You would have AI mode on one side, and you would have the website on the other, so that you could continue to ask questions that would help your search experience through that site. Now, would web owners be happy with that? Absolutely not. No one would be happy with that. But ultimately, I could see that being an experience that they provide, again, because they have been talking about this for quite some time. I actually just watched a really interesting interview with Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, as he talked about how search is going to evolve, and it's going to be how we, in the whole agentic future, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, that is something that we, something that might happen. Oh, we have let's see, what do we got? We have Kent sent something. Let's see what we got. Look at that, everyone. A new way to explore the web with AI mode and well, everyone, I've done it again. Okay. Well, there you have it, everyone. Again, not surprised that thanks for sending that over, Ken. I appreciate it. Not surprised that that's an experience that they're exploring, right? Because this is something that Bing has been doing, for a long time. And I have to use it before I say I love it or hate it, or like it, or tolerate it. But ultimately, that is something that here we are, and I'm sure they're going to be talking about this as a new experience. That's very funny. Sorry, Christy, I'm not trying to. It's like I literally was thinking about this all week. I was like, I wonder if that's what they're going to do. So that's funny that just came out. So either way, life's funny, everyone. But that's why I think that they're not going to switch the default to AI mode. I think they're going to incorporate AI mode more, I guess, is the headline here. And it looks like that is something that is going to happen. So here we are, everyone. So come back here next time. If you want me to make something happen, I'll say it live, and maybe Google will do it. Let's move on. We've got about 10 minutes left. So AIO volatility varies drastically by industry. So let's look at some data. We just launched a new study. It came out yesterday. Our amazing researcher, Gia, put it together. She's super smart. And we found a lot of interesting, kind of data points here. The one that stood out to me, because it is interesting, because most of the time that we come together every month, I am showing you AI overviews increasing for the industries that I happen to be looking at that month. And what you look when you see that here, this one was like the AI coverage rate, which basically how often does it show up. We knew that at the December update and into January, that it peaked at one of its highest points at around 45%. It actually made it up to as much as 47%. But in February, it actually dropped to 34.4% overall, which just shows you how volatile this still is. It's not as volatile as it was like a year ago, but ultimately, something to take into account. But like, think about this: between September of 2025 and January of 2026, right? The rate of AI overviews nearly doubled from 23% to 47%, but then they dropped back down to 34% just a month later. Right. So it shows you that Google is really ramping it up. And what do I always say? We turn the dial up, we turn the dial down. And, that's how Google kind of operates. Right. But when you look at it by industry to industry, AI overview like coverage is definitely not uniform. A good example of this was communication services. Peak coverage at one point was 63%. While real estate remained like much lower than that consistently, right? But again, it shows you that Google is really thinking about this from an industry perspective. I still think it's insane that some of the highest coverage rates that we see are in healthcare and financial services because, again, of the whole YMYL, your money, your life, situation. But ultimately, that's something to consider as well. The volatility metric that I'm talking about, like this is definitely something that would be interesting to talk to an executive about, in my opinion. Just think about, because they're like, well, when do these things show up? When do they don't? It is really, it's going to really mess with any, predictions or like traffic forecasts that everyone's going to have. So these are the types of things I think you should be educating your leadership on, that, hey, you might like 1 month, your coverage might be 60%. The next month, it might be 25%. Like those drops happen in certain industries, and you may get way more impressions, or 1 month, and then they tank the next month. I actually saw this. I was talking to a customer yesterday, and they are actually experiencing this right now, and we think it has something to do with the volatility in their AI overview, impressions, which would be awesome to see if Google would just split all of those out, and we could actually not, pontificate on whether or not it has something to do with ranking, if it has something to do with AI mode, if it has something to do with this. And it was actually about AI overviews. So hopefully we'll get that at I/O. See, I'm breathing that into existence. Hopefully, everybody. If that does happen, I'm going to retire, because that's just too much power, Sam. It's just too much power. But ultimately, but again, like there are also industries that experience great growth over many months, and then there are sharp pullbacks. Like IT and financials. So 5 consecutive months of growth, but then there was a pullback. In the early part of the year. So again, all of this to say is that the headline here is that there are. That it is incredibly volatile still for AI overviews. And my guess is, everyone, it's going to remain that way. I don't think that we're going to see like a stable, coverage percentage anytime soon. But ultimately, I guess we'll have to see, what happens. So let's move on from that. But definitely go read the study. The study is really well done. A lot of interesting stuff out there. How are we doing? 7 minutes. All right, everyone. Hopefully we'll get to the MCP thing, because that's what I've been spending half my life doing. But obviously everyone hopefully knows about this. On April 3rd, Google posted that since May of 2025, there was a logging error that has been causing inflated impression counts in your account, in my account, in Sam's account, in everybody's account. So that's really annoying. Literally pretty much, we're at April 16th here. So pretty much for an entire year, we have all been looking at inflated impression data. Now, what does that mean? Now we all have to wonder, does that mean that we are, does that mean that all of those alligator charts, you guys remember, like the alligator charts where like clicks went like this and then impressions went like this and it looked like an alligator? Like, did that have something to do with this? Clearly it did, because that was happening. That was happening around, when did that start? In like November of 2024, something like that. Like, was that the start? But then like a lot of the big ones were around May of 2025. So ultimately, the big question, obviously, are they fixing it? Yes, they are fixing it. My guess is this will happen in fairly short order. Like, we're not going to have to wait too much time for this. But ultimately, one thing that you should consider if you haven't done it already is you should download your Search Console data. If you're a Conductor user, this will be in your account in perpetuity, so you don't have to do anything. But ultimately, Search Console will correct itself, and it will retro. So you won't be able to see what it looked like back in the day. I've actually seen accounts that have already been corrected. So they're definitely already rolling out a fix. But it's something to consider if you want to see what the difference in impression count was, during the months that, from May 2025, basically until May 2026, and what the difference was between those things. Now would be the time to download your data. You probably didn't miss the bus yet. But again, if you're a Conductor customer, all that data is in your account as we keep that in perpetuity. So with that, the next thing here. So if you have any questions about that, always feel free to reach out to me. Now, the next thing. We have about 4 minutes here. And everyone, I'm going to go ahead and bring my Claude account over. By the way, I am also in somewhat of a situationship with my Claude account right now. I'm just going to reshare my screen. It's truly amazing what you can do here with our MCP, which we are actually putting out into the wild at Adobe Summit next week, which is really exciting. I think we're booth 449, right, Marley, Haley, 449. I think I got that right. So if you're at Adobe Summit, definitely come and hang out with the Conductor team. We are going to be showcasing a lot of new features that are coming out that are super, super cool. But the coolest one of all, everyone, that again, if you're a Conductor customer, this is something that you'll be able to get access to very soon, is our MCP server. Now, I've talked about MCP, our MCP for many, many sessions now. And I still am excited as I was the first time I actually saw this thing, because now I actually have my hands on it. And I just want to show you the possibilities here. So right now, all of our AI data, so AI search performance for those who are Conductor customers, but for those who aren't, we have a portion of our product that is dedicated to AI search and visibility and research and action. Right now, we have all of that data in our MCP. Very soon, we will have all of our SEO data. So that's traditional metrics like keyword rankings, traffic, et cetera, et cetera. And the cool thing is you'll be able to mix and match and compare and contrast and, analyze all of this against one another very, very soon. But right now, just looking at the AI data, something that I do, if I look at, I'm looking at Conductor's account right now. And basically what I did is I connected it to Claude. And I asked it, can you analyze Conductor's AI presence and create a chart that shows progress and give recommendations on what to do to improve? And again, as you can see, we have skills that we pair with this. We have an AEO audit skill, which will also be available to our customers. We're building libraries for everybody, which has been a lot of fun. And it's going to be really cool to kind of help customers navigate that. But also, look at this. Look at everything across here, because we're tracking many, many brands across 7 AI engines. And look at what I was able to create in about 30 seconds just by asking that one question. I have all of the brand mentions by AI engine, citation share by engine, top performers, us versus all of our competitors, our sentiment trend. Are we trending in a positive way? Are we trending in a negative? How are we trending for positive sentiment, neutral sentiment, and negative sentiment? And then all the prioritized recommendations on what we should do, right? And the cool thing is that it keeps going, right? And all of this was by asking that one question, but it's all enriched with Conductor's data. And everybody, this is the future of all this, because then I could build on this with any question that came to my mind. I could ask it to build charts. I could ask it to build, anything. I had a customer the other day that I was asking, I was like, hey, listen, we really don't like line graphs. We use bar charts. What can I do? I was like, well, you can actually just, and we actually got them connected to our MCP. And they were able to take the same data and visualize it for the presentation that they have to give. And it's that easy, right? All you have to do, I got all of this data, all these charts and everything, just by asking this one question and just by doing so. Everyone, like, if you are a Conductor customer, please, bother your AM to get, the MCP once it's fully launched after Adobe Summit next week. And then for folks that are not Conductor customers, what are you waiting for? Come on over, right? Like, we got a lot of cool stuff cooking here. And we have and our data platform is the only place in the market that you can compare all traditional metrics with AI metrics and technical data as well. And you can create some really cool stuff. I'm going to be doing this as a segment probably once a month now, just showing different things that I'm doing with our MCP. And I would love if anyone has any questions to reach out, or if you're using the MCP yourself, I would love to showcase examples of folks as well. So feel free to send them over to me. But with that, everybody, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen once again because I have to reshare so that everyone can see, so that I can do my my ending as usual. So with that, everybody, we have once again made it to the end of 30 minutes. Everybody, thank you so much. We talked a lot about algorithms today, but just remember, the only algorithm or LLM that matters is the heart, mind, and soul of your customer. If you create great content that they like and love, they will come back and be customers for life. If you are a Conductor customer, join the community. We have a lot of fun there. I do office hours once a month. Sometimes we have 3 people. Sometimes we have 50 people. It's completely up to you which way you want to go. All you got to do is go over to the nav, hit community, and come and join us. We have a good time. We're good people, right? Like, good times. Folks have joined. And then from there, everybody, if you are going to be at Adobe Summit, we are booth 449. Please come and say hi. Again, we're going to be demoing some amazing new features, really exciting stuff that no one has seen outside of Conductor's walls. But with that, everybody, I know I say this every month. Thank you so much for spending 30 minutes of your valuable time with me. This is my favorite part of my job, and I would not be able to do it without all of y'all. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next month.